everyone. I am Jeannie Ralston. I'm the founder of Next Tribe, and I am so happy to have with us Laura Zigman, the author of Small World, another great new novel, one of her novels. I was just telling her that we had her on for Separation Anxiety, which was another great, fabulous book. And I said, oh my God, it feels so weird. We feels like we just had you on, and you've accomplished another novel that quickly. It makes me feel like I've not done anything in the meantime. So anyway, so congratulations, Laura, for your on this great novel.
Thank you. It was so nice to get to do this again, because we did it, as you know, Separation Anxiety came out right before the pandemic. And so I was among that first group of authors to like Zoom what do I do? Yeah, so I remember we did a great event. I really enjoyed it.
I know, and it was probably my one of my first Zooms, and I sad to report, I don't know if I've gotten any better technologically. So.
I have not. I can't even use a filter. I don't even know the filters are. So
I have advanced to putting a book behind me, my part of the book cover behind me.
I'm impressed. Yeah. I'm really impressed. I can't do that.
I always like to so the image stays in people's mind. Well, I'm going to just do. You have the shortest bio, and it's so humble, which cracks me up. But you're the author of Animal Husbandry, Dating Big Bird, Piece of Work, and Her. You've been you are a contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Huffington Post. You live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with your husband, son, and deeply human Sheltie. So is your Sheltie still hanging on?
Yes, she's right.
Oh my God.
Luckily I cannot see myself right now. I only see you. Usually I have to look at myself and I can't. Anyway, so my dog is asleep on the bed. In fact, people think she's a cat from the way she looks, but she's 14.
Oh my gosh. Well, she had her moment on the cover of your book, on your last Separation Anxiety.
I know. I had a great jacket designer, and the artist painted her, and who gets that?
I hope you get the frame. You framed that.
You know what? She not only did the most amazing jacket, and the dog is on the spine, but right during COVID, her name is Anne Bentley, and you've probably seen her work at like Anthropology, a lot of places. She's really talented. And she just made like an extra painting for me with the dog. And she sent it during COVID. I was at the very beginning of COVID. I was like, who is this? How is this happening? Like, it was so generous. I framed it. It's beautiful.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, we're going to start out and you're going to read a passage from the book if you want to set it up, and then we'll get into talking about it.
Sure. So first, I'd like to say hello to my sister-in-law, Barbara.
Wave, Barbara.
Joining us from Southern California.
Oh, wow.
Just say hello. I know I can't.
I love Barbara. So Small World is about two adult divorced sisters who move in together. One sister moves back from California. One lives in Cambridge. They haven't really lived on the same coast for 30 years. And they move back. They're both divorced. And they live together. And, they think, well, this will be weird for a little while. And then, they think Joyce, the sister who lives in Cambridge, thinks, well, she'll be here for, a month, maybe two. And of course, it stretches on into almost a year. So this is when Joyce is picking Lydia up from the airport when she first is arriving. It's a gray January afternoon when I pick Lydia up from the airport, the kind of day that always reminds me of how hard it is to live here on the East Coast in New England. When, in the cold, wet shock of air in the open parking garage, she says about the weather, nice, great, I've really missed this. I resist the urge to apologize for it, even though it still feels like my fault, this freezing cold welcome home, a bracing slap across the face, which I can't help but think she kind of deserves for leaving me alone here for so long. She has two bags, a carry-on and a large silver metal case that she checked, and when I put them in the trunk, I compliment her on her light packing job. Everything else is in storage, she says, pulling a thin, bright orange puffer jacket out of her carry-on for the ride home. Brad was kind enough to offer to ship it once I get settled. That was nice of Brad, I say, wasn't it? But then Brad's always been a nice person, much nicer than me. It occurs to me then that Brad was my brother-in-law for almost 20 years. And yet I have no idea how true that statement is. Who is Brad? Who is Lydia? Living so far away from each other made it almost impossible to know. And now it doesn't even matter. Divorce makes the past irrelevant. He's gone and she's here. And now, for the first time in years, probably since Louise's funeral 5 years ago, we're both in the same car heading home. I take the scenic route back from the airport, making sure to take Starrow Drive and then Memorial Drive so that Lydia can see what she's missed all these years. The sexy curve of the Charles River, the runners snaking alongside it despite the cold, the indigo sky, a color and texture only Van Gogh or Turner could mix. I park on the street in front of my apartment on the first floor of a midnight blue Victorian on a leafy street not far from Harvard Square. And on the way into the house, she stops, resting her bag on the brick sidewalk. She stares up at the sky and then takes in a long, deep, cold breath, then exhales it in a big gray cloud. All the trees are bare, and the tiny bit of light that guided us home from the airport is fading fast. Winter, she says softly, reverentially, looking at me over her shoulder with an unusually sweet smile. Somewhere nearby, someone's fireplace is lit, and we can both smell it. I've kind of missed it. For a second, I step outside myself. My sister, who has not lived here in decades, is finally back, on her way into my apartment, where the two of us are about to be roommates for a while. Suddenly, too late, I'm terrified. This could be a disaster. It likely will be a disaster. All the old wounds of childhood and beyond will definitely resurface, and then we'll fight, and then we'll be stuck together in the same house for who knows how long, and then she'll leave, and it will end badly, really badly. So badly that we may never talk to each other again after that. Whose idea was this? I don't believe you missed winter, I say. I said I kind of missed it, not that I really missed it. She pulls on her bag and follows me up the walk and inside the vestibule. As I lead the way, I think I hear her say, I'm so excited to see your place again, but part of me is certain I imagined it.
Oh, very good. So evocative. I can almost smell the fire and, that New England winter.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I thought of California Dreaming when you were talking about all those gone early.
So different.
So I just think it's amazing that, I haven't read all your books, I know, but I'm sorry to say, but Separation Anxiety was about a woman kind of this age, this 45 plus age, kind of a little bit adrift. Are you really tapped into that? It's a rich time, isn't it?
Yeah. I really think so. I'm deep in it. I turned 60 this summer, and it was a hard number. It's a hard number. And but when I started writing Separation Anxiety, I was in my sort of early to mid 50s, which still feels really different than I feel right now. And so this one I started right during COVID, right after my book tour was canceled. But and I didn't, I sort of thought of it as a comic situation. They move in together and then they have these horrible neighbors upstairs. And we actually, live in this apartment in Cambridge and had these horrible neighbors upstairs who now I live upstairs, but we were downstairs. It was, and these people moved in, and I don't know if people have read the book or if it's a spoiler, but these people move in, upstairs of Joyce and Lydia, same as in real life for us. And they start a business up there. It's noisy. And, so I thought, oh, it's like a really comic situation. I have these two sisters and they have to deal with the people and blah, blah. And very quickly I realized, yes. And, there was so much comic potential for that, but there was a much more serious side to the story, which was their childhood. But I thought it would be so comic to have, when you get together with your family, there's that initial, especially if you don't live near, that initial, everything's within like minutes. You're just like at each other. It's just like you regress, they regress. It just devolves so fast. And so I thought that would be great. And then of course, in this story, it gave me an opportunity to really explore a semi-autobiographical piece of my family is in this. And that's what.
Yes. What can you share with us about that? Because I know that's the standard question. Is this autobiographical? Yeah,
my stuff is always autobiographical. I have no issue with it. Some people get really tweaked if you ask them. Yeah. I always start in a really autobiographical place, and then of course I fictionalize it. But my sister lives in California and has lived there. She, like Lydia, when I started to write this book, I was like, okay, I'm going to write about two sisters, but it's not really anything current. It's like about childhood. And the Lydia in the book is very, very different from my sister, except that she's also an artist. And my sister's a really talented painter. And my sister-in-law's a really good artist too. But my sister went to RISD, and so there is that similarity, but everything else is really different. But in real life, our family, our oldest sister, Cheryl, was born in 1958. She was diagnosed at 6 months with a terminal disease. She had a really rare bone disease where her bones didn't produce bone marrow. And in about 1960, right after my sister Linda was born, she was moved into an institution called Fernald. And I mean, this is the early 60s. The language was very different. Those institutions were still open and working. And she lived at one town over at a place called Fernald. And it looked like a college campus. And of course it wasn't. Obviously not an institution for, they were called retarded children back then, but now we don't use those words. And she was in a medical building because she really had a medical condition, and she died when she was 7. So we didn't, Linda and I didn't really know her. She wasn't like a sibling who lived with us and everything. And it was really something that happened to my parents. But it happened to us because then we lived with my parents and grew up in a family that had lost a child. And it was like, almost like people who grew up with Holocaust survivors, it's like, it didn't happen to you, but it happened to the people raising you, and it colors everything. So in the book, they also had a sister who died, but it was very different. I really wanted to explore what it would have been like to have the sibling living at home. And so in Small World, there's Lydia is the oldest, and there's a middle sister, Eleanor, and she is born with severe CP, cerebral palsy, and a seizure thing and a thing with a thing. But she lives at home, and their mother, Louise, is obsessed, and all the attention goes, almost all the attention goes to Eleanor, which is a really noble thing. I mean, she wants Eleanor to be included. It takes place in the early 70s when the disability movement was really just starting. One of the founders, one of the really most prominent figures in the disability community, Judith Human just died recently. But that was a movement. Things weren't always, there weren't always, sidewalks that sloped and, stuff like that. And so that was a movement that started in the 70s. And so Louise in the book is this sort of accidental activist. She becomes this impassioned advocate for her daughter, for Eleanor. And of course, at the expense of the other two, are sort of ignored because they're fine, and they don't need anything. And there's actually a term for that now that is used, and it's called well child syndrome. So kids who grow up, healthy kids who grow up in a family that either has a special needs kid or whatever, often feel ignored because they're not getting as much attention, understandably so.
Yeah, and also I'm sure they feel guilty then
Yes.
for wanting attention when they have their limb, so it's like
you feel really bad because your parents are doing their best, and yet you're like, what about me? So in the novel, Lydia and Joyce, have never really talked about it, and they, Lydia moved away right after college and has lived on the other coast for years and years, and they don't really know each other, and they never really talked about this stuff. And so then they move in together, and of course it's a perfect opportunity with all the stress of the horrible neighbors upstairs, and that also, was really a comic thing to me, because I thought if my sister moved in, we would get along, it would be fine, she's great, and I also know that I knew exactly what would happen very quickly, because she has lived on the West Coast, and it's like you have a much sunnier disposition up there. Like, I am angry, I'm judgy and grudgy. What do you want? I live here. I live in Boston. Who isn't? But she would come. I know it, and she'd be like, actually, I want to take the yoga classes upstairs. Like, at first she'd be sort of sympathetic, and then she'd be like, why are you so negative? Like, it's great, because that's what California people are like, hey, I want to have a commute. It's right. Yeah, let's go. Let's do it. I would, so the whole dynamic, a lot of their relationship plays out in, like, that kind of triangulation with the people upstairs. And
Well, I want to just ask people, if you have questions or comments, you can write them in chat, and then, can call on you and you can ask Laura yourself. But I'm interested in the whole thing, because I was thinking, is this a book about sisters, or is it a book about grief, or is it, I mean, it's about, I guess it's about both. And I mean, would you say it's not more about sisters, but more about grief? I don't know. What would you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, as I was writing it, I was really hoping that it would be balanced and it wouldn't be too grim. And I also used to err on the side of maybe too much, so smug, too much humor. Oh, my stuff was too funny. But no, but my earlier books, it was very, very, it was always the joke, always a joke. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, you get to a certain age, and at my age now, I just see the world a little differently. I want the joke, I want the funny, but I also really I want to cry. Like, I want the really serious message to come through. Also, I want a book to crack me open when I read it. And I'm not, I mean, there's a time and a place for really funny stuff, and you should read whatever you like. And I don't care what anyone reads. If they read Colleen Hoover and love it, that's great. I don't care, but I mean, it's just that if, when I'm writing now, I just want it to have a heft to it and a kind of a tenderness to it. So there is, but I was worried. I was like, this could be too much. So then I think the next door, the poetry stuff kind of leavens it a little, and the humor of the people upstairs and stuff leavens it.
Yeah, I thought it was really a good balance. But why do you think at this point, you want to have a little more serious on them? Not, more.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think you get to a certain age, or I got to a certain age, I had a decade. I think I was, in my mid 40s to my mid 50s, were like, I got sick, this person got sick, both my parents got sick and died, this happened, that. And it was one of those years, and we all have those. I mean, sometimes I have friends who had really tough times in their 30s, there's no time, but this middle age time really is. People start to split up, you separate, everything is just in flux. And I think you get a sense of a feeling of like you just want to be kind in a way, or you want to have a sense of hope, leave the reader with a sense of hope. So even though with separation anxiety, and in this book, it's not like a happy, wrapped up perfect ending, but there's hope, in both of those stories that it is a good ending. It's just not, super
Right. It's not all like perfect, but it's real.
It's not, that's like life. Yeah.
And that's what I would say too about your characters. They are so authentic, because I think all of us, I hope all of us can find some humor in even the darkest time. I mean, as humans, it's a survival mechanism, and you bring that out, like even like,
good. I'm glad.
Like when she's like, what, the scene where she's kind of stalking her sister, like watching her, I just cracked up. So I was reading the New York Times review, and by the way, you've gotten great reviews on this book. You must be really happy about that.
Like, shocked. Yeah, it hadn't really happened like that before. Yeah.
So the New York Times, the way she started it, the reviewer was like, she could almost feel like you were, hesitant about diving into this. And was that accurate to that? Is this something you thought about for a while, this subject of your family, your early family?
Yeah. I mean, it was something that I felt I'd always wanted to write about, because I felt like it really would explain who I am. I think when you grow up in a family we all grow up in different families. I mean, some people's families, the parents drink, or that was not my family. We're Jews. So we had a whole different thing. And when you grow up in a particular way, you think everybody grows up this way. And I think I remember the exact moment when I realized I had a very different childhood than other people. I was on a business trip with a publishing. I worked in publishing for 10 years, and we were in Newport Beach outside and having a drink. It was a convention. And my friend, who was from New Jersey and similar background from mine, and we kind of looked alike. And she started to tell me all these hilarious stories of her childhood and her grandparents and her parents. Everyone was, and I just realized it was like a thunderbolt. And I was like, wow, I come from a sad family. Like, it just was so, but I hadn't realized it. And so this book to me was like, I felt like it was the story I always wanted to tell, because it explained us in a way, and it helped explain it to me too. Like, what was really great was that my sister and I now have had all these conversations about it that we didn't really have. And what I regret most, and I wrote a piece about it it ended up in Maria Shriver's Sunday paper thing. But when both my mother died in 2010 and my father died in 2013, 10 years ago, and I had so much opportunity. I left New York and I moved back, and I had all these years to ask them a million questions. I had all these years when the institution where my sister had lived was still open, and I didn't. I did not want to go there. I was probably angry all my life that I had felt like I'd lived in the shadow of my sister, this person I didn't even know. And I had a lot of compassion for my parents, and I certainly, didn't resent them really consciously, but deep down, I think I was like, I don't want to. And it was so ridiculous, because it was like only after my father died, and only after Fernald literally shut down. Like, I actually went there, I think in 2014, and I drove onto the campus, and I was chased off by, like, now you can't even go there. You can't get onto the campus. But I think I was able to, I got onto the campus, but I couldn't go into any building. It was closed. I mean, and I thought it was such a lost opportunity. I don't even know when my sister was moved there. I don't even know the exact date. And so there's all these holes in the story that, in fiction, you just make it up, and I'm telling a different story, and a slightly different story anyway. But I regret not asking those questions when I had the chance. But that's, it happens when it happens.
And but it sounds like you and your sister didn't even talk about it when you were growing up. I mean, or even after you'd grown up.
We really didn't, it was always like a thing. And it was always like, my father talked about it all the time, and my mother never really talked about it, but it was never a family conversation. Like, when my father talked about it, he just kind of talked at you. It wasn't like it just wasn't that way. And I think in those days, I think they were probably just advised, like, move along, don't burden there was a whole different time. It wasn't, there wasn't like Dr. Phil and Oprah, we weren't in a culture where people, and especially now, grief is in the national conversation. I mean, especially with Joe Biden. I mean, he's had a lot of grief, and COVID's happening, and it's for the first time, like, we're actually talking about this stuff. But this is like, years ago, nobody knew, so it was different.
Wow.
But
can you imagine that how different life could have been if there had been openness?
Yeah.
I wonder what, I mean, you did turn out pretty well, I would say. So anyway, but I mean,
sort of.
You'd probably be running the world at this point.
Yeah, right.
So Anne has a question, and I don't know if Anne, do you want to unmute, or do you want me to ask it for you? Now I'm going to make you unmute.
I don't mind unmuting at all. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for hosting this with Jeannie. I'm very curious to hear about your writing process, if you included Barbara in some of it, since she was the character that is, the sister is still the sister in your life.
She's my sister-in-law. This is Barbara's
sister-in-law.
My sister-in-law. That's okay.
But the question, but it's a good question about what you consulted, what you showed your sister.
Did you guys did you consult with her about some of the?
That's a really good question. It was a complicated situation, because as as we all know, we go through periods, if we have siblings, where we don't get along. And my sister and I had had a really rough patch. We'd gotten along all of our lives, and we had a really rough patch for a few years when our parents were ill. And it was very rough. And we had finally gotten to this really good place where we were fine. And we never really talked about it, and we didn't go there, and we didn't need to. It was like, it happened, it was over. We'd moved along, we sort of moved away from it. And here I am now, like, I want to write this book. And in my mind, I knew that it wasn't going to cover those difficult years that, that we fought or whatever. It was not going to have nothing to do with that. It was going to be about our past. And so for the first time, I was like actually an adult, and I called my sister and I said, listen, I'm going to write this book, and it's about two sisters who move in together. I said, but I don't want you to worry. It's not about, I'm not going to go there, like, I'm not going to write about anything. It's childhood stuff, and I'm going to make a lot of stuff up. And she sort of interrupted me, and she just said, I trust you, write your book. And that, given what we'd been through those years, was really hard. And it was such a gift, and then I finished the book, and I sent it to her. I said, I'm done. I really want you to read it. If there's anything in there, and again, it's still, a lot of it is still fictionalized, but a lot of the scenes are fictionalized, but they come from stuff that really happened. So it's a mixture. And it was really funny. It wasn't funny at the time, but I said, if there's anything in there you want me to change or take out or whatever. And so she, and my sister is like way better than me about communicating. Like she calls and I'm terrible. I'm a terrible communicator. So it was very unusual for me not to hear back from her quickly, because and so it was torture. I thought, oh my God, she hates it. So like, I don't know, 9 or 10 days went by, and I hadn't heard from her. And then she texted and she said, I'm halfway through or something. And I was waiting for the little dots, like for her to say something else. And they were like other little dots. And I was like, wow. I said, oh, great. I said, I hope you don't hate it. And then she said, no, I don't hate it.
Oh, okay.
And I was waiting for more dots, no dots. And I was like, okay. So then anyway, a few days later she did, and she read it, and she loved it. And but it was hard. It was hard for her to read. I think at the beginning it felt like I was writing about her. And then she very quickly realized I wasn't, but she meant it was hard in the sense that like, it was hard, there's stuff from, that we hadn't really ever talked about. And it just opened up a lot. And what's so interesting is my sister is a painter, and she went to Rhode Island School of Design, and she's really talented, and she's been really blocked. And she has made many, many fewer memories than I have. And so it's so funny how, like our childhoods affect us in so many ways. And I'm really hoping that I really feel like a lot of her block is from childhood. It's just like we weren't really encouraged to express ourselves. I mean, in the most benign way, like it wasn't a terrible thing, but we just weren't, and especially she wasn't. And so I think there's just a really big block that she has, an artistic block. And I was blocked for a decade. I didn't write for 10 years. So I understand what that's like. And I'm just like, I really hope she gets past it, because she has, great stuff to paint.
Well, I love too that you said it's kind of, you've been able to talk. It was like the impetus to talk about some of the stuff the book was.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you feel like you have a new relationship with your sister after this?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like, I think what was also helpful for me when I wrote this is like, she moved away right after college, and I was in college. So we really weren't we have never lived in the same place. And we visited a lot more than Joyce and Lydia in the book, but, it's quick trips here and things, back and forth. And our kids, I think, I love her kids and she loves my son. And so we have that really nice, she's a great aunt to my son, and her kids are great, everything. So I just feel like, it's it's just us. And in a way it was always just us, like when we were growing up, like it was just, you know, I mean, every family is different and every sibling thing is different, but, you know, what was really interesting was that in my little bit of research that I did, I found out that there are these sibling groups now, and they're for all different ages, and they're organizations that deal with young kids who are, you know, like in elementary school or junior high school or high school, who are living with, you know, a special needs sibling and they need attention to, that kind of thing. But the really interesting thing is that there are these sibling groups for older people who have adult siblings of special needs, you know, and so I went to a group meeting once, and that's in the piece that I wrote, that was in the Maria Shriver piece, but I went to one of these sibling groups online, and it was so fascinating because, you know, they're grown-ups and they have a sibling who's disabled and they're 60, you know, so
That's
just
cool.
interesting. There's like all the stuff that people don't know about for siblings, but anyway.
So I'm not sure who, somebody wrote a question and it just says iPad, but if your iPad right there, I see you, iPad, can you unmute? You know that you wrote a question, and I'd love for you to ask it, or you wrote a comment. Where's my iPad? There you are.
Hi, I'm Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Sorry about the iPad.
Okay, that's okay.
I usually use the laptop, and I noticed my name does not come up on the iPad. Sorry, it's Mary.
Okay.
Hi, Laura. I really
Hi.
loved the book.
Thank you.
I loved it.
Thank you.
Couple of 2-3 different things in it really touched me. The handicapped child. I have 2 grandchildren who have autism, so I was able to relate to that. A couple other things. I enjoyed the part about the people upstairs, because I would have reacted exactly the same way. I would have hated them.
Right?
So I really enjoyed that. And there was something else you touched on that I found so interesting, was that when you're a kid, there's always something, or certainly more than one thing, that you don't understand that's going on, and no one ever tells you, explains it. That amazed me. I got that from
Yeah,
your
that's
book.
that's so right. That's so right.
Yeah, there's
Like,
always something,
yeah.
you know.
And everyone who grows up in a family, there's some secret, there's something.
Yeah, it's something, you know,
And they
Yeah.
more than one thing usually.
Yeah. But
But,
they say the kids don't, like you said, don't burden the kids, but the whole not knowing, you imagine something else,
Yeah.
or whatever.
yeah, it's that really got me. It's, you
Yeah.
know.
Well,
But-
thank you so much, Mary. I love your comments. And
I really enjoyed the book so much.
Thank you so much. That means a lot.
I want to talk about sisters here. So I'm going to do this. Look what I've done. I can now, oops, now I have to find it. I can do a poll. Look at me. So
Oh
if
my
you have a
God.
sister, if you want to answer if you'd be able to live with them right now. Look, we've only got one person answering. No, 3 people. We don't have anybody who said yes, sure. Anybody else want to answer?
I could.
You could,
I had to.
if you had to. I'm sure you've talked about that now.
I'm not saying I'm easy to live with either. Believe me, I'm not sure what her answer would be.
So, in our tiny little poll here, 71% said if they had to. So, but I think I have 2 sisters, and one of them is divorced. My little sister's divorced too, and so off and on we've always talked about, oh, we had to, we'd live together. But I this made me really think about that. I mean, you know, you're there's so much, there is a bond, but you've gone and become other things. But when I think you talked about it when we were, or before everybody joined, is that you can fall back when you're with, you can
You just regress instantly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did something that, and so what was your kind of role in the family? And, if you had a role?
Yeah, I was like the sort of the funny one, and then the quiet one. Like my sister was much more emotional, and they didn't like that. She would get upset like a normal child would in that situation, and she was like that. It was like, oh, she would, they would say, oh, you ruined the day, or she could, she was upset. Like now we have more understanding of what kids, maybe we've gone too far the other way. I mean, some people think we've gone too far, oh, the child, but back then it was like, it was a very different style of parenting, and it was really, especially for my family, like that's just how it was back then. Like you just didn't, parents were the parents and the kids really didn't have a say. And if you had a feeling, no one was interested. It was just like, oh, you're having a feeling, please go away. And it's very, very different now. And so my role was more like, I didn't speak up much. Linda was always the defender. She was my defender. She was always speaking up about things that, bothered her. And it was not pleasant for her. And, so I was more of the peacemaker or the peacekeeper. And then she moved away, and I stayed. And that was also my role, was to stay. And, like we each have a role in a family, and then we each have that, we take that role with our friends and our relationships and our marriages if we're married. And that's also part of the book, which is just that, you're a product of your childhood. We all are. It's so obvious. I mean, it's not like I'm Freud, but, those relationships end up being really the product of those earliest years of
Right.
how we think of ourselves. And
Jean has an interesting comment. Jean, do you want to unmute and just share your comment? Because I think it's really interesting. If Jean's there,
she's shaking her head. Maybe she
probably she doesn't want to. If you don't want to, I could. Her comment is, a dear friend grew up with a disabled older sister. He often said, my sister is an only child. And I think what I get from that, Jean, you can correct me in the comments if you don't want to speak up, is that she was treated as an only child, meaning she got the kind of attention that an only child gets.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right. And so that means she was like, we were talking about that, the well child syndrome or something. She was like an appendage or a third wheel or something, it sounds.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's just so, it makes me so sad for that. But of course, again, we're like, okay, her sister was disabled, so she had her.
But that's the thing is, they're doing their best, and they're trying to give all the attention to the child that needs it most. But and then of course, and I think that's why that scene in the book, if you've read the book, where they go to that camp, the Camp Fantastic, and that was really inspired by, I don't know how many people saw the movie Crip Camp, but Crip Camp was a documentary, a Netflix documentary. It was the first documentary that was produced by the Obamas for Netflix. And it was an amazing, you should watch it if you haven't seen it, but it's an amazing documentary about this camp in upstate New York. And I think for most of the summer, it was like a regular camp. And then for a period of the summer, it was for disabled kids. And this was like the early 70s. So they were bussed up from all, from New York City. A lot of the kids came from New York City, but the counselors were not really trained. They were students, and they were, like a raggedy team of counselors. And it was this incredibly transformational place. And all these disabled kids who went, and some were, some couldn't move, couldn't talk, couldn't this, couldn't that, pretty severe situations. And they were like, they did drugs there, they had sex there, they found themselves there in this incredible, and they went for a couple of summers, and it was so transformative for them that they became, a whole bunch of them became, one is a producer of the movie, but they became hugely powerful in the disability movement. I mean, they went on and did amazing things, and they all credited this camp for empowering them, for making them see that they could have, a life too. And in the novel, it's really where Joyce and Lydia feel seen, oddly enough, because it's, it's a camp for Eleanor, but it's the first time that they are actually sort of like included. I mean, that,
Right,
the
right.
irony being that inclusion and exclusion, but they feel actually like brought into her world.
Yeah, and there's
and part of
she
it.
said something about it's one of the only pictures of like the three of them or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which was
Yeah.
so interesting
Yeah.
for many reasons. One thing that I found interesting is I felt like no, Joyce, I would say Joyce is the main character. I felt like Joyce, she was kind of a voyeur, right?
Yeah.
And was that because like growing up, she always felt on the outside?
Yeah, Joyce is like, they're both a little socially challenged. Lydia's a little bit more like blurt, just kind of blurts stuff. But Joyce is just, yeah, I think she just feels very apart, especially since her divorce. And that's why she likes the small world, the next door kind of thing, the small world. And that's why she gets obsessed with that site, because it's like she can kind of eavesdrop on other people's questions and problems and issues and thoughts without having to actually go outside and deal with anyone. And it's
And
funny.
her job also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and her job is, it's funny, when I was starting the book, she had, as a writer, like you try to figure out, okay, what does this person do, and so at the beginning when I was writing it, I was like, okay, she's going to be a fact checker, like a book fact checker. And I kind of love that because, someone really persnickety and picky and everything. And then I could not get that to work. I was like, you gave me nothing. And one of the funny things, if I don't know if there are any other writers here, I think there are, that you procrastinate when you're writing. You just it's so awful to do it that you just have to procrastinate all the time. But a lot of times, the procrastination takes the form, the excuse is, well, I have to do research. So I personally spent a lot of time researching. I was on Nextdoor a lot looking for these posts to make poetry from and everything. And I also I was so stuck at a certain point that I would listen to a lot of, and I swear, like, you think it's just like pure procrastination, but when you're doing this kind of thing, like ideas will come to you out of nowhere. So one night I was listening to This American Life, and I was listening to one of those segments, which was about, I don't even remember what it was about. It was about something. And within, something, they interviewed a woman, and I don't even know what the story was about, but all I remember is she said, I had my headphones on, it was late at night, and all I remember saying was like, I'm obsessed with people's slideshows. She said, I love if there's a graduation. I think she worked for a school, but she said, I love when they show the slideshow, or I go to a bat mitzvah or a wedding, and you see the slideshow, and half the time you don't know who the people are. You don't know who they are. She goes, I don't know who they are. She goes, I sob I love them so much. I love the slide. And then I was like, oh my God, I love it. That's like, I get obsessed with things. So I was like, the slideshow, so then I found a company that, I thought, oh, she'll work for a company that makes the slideshows. And so then I turned it into that. But yeah, it's her way of also being a voyeur and also fixing the pictures.
I just love that. Was hilarious. Like, is it bad to tell that part? Because it's really
no. So she works for this company. It's like these companies exist. You send them all your analog, your VCR tapes, your all your old shit, and they make it digital. They digitize it, and a lot of institutions use it. Like colleges will, like there are different uses for it. But so she works for this company, and she sometimes gets to help on the slideshows, but mainly she digitizes family stuff. So big family, they'll send her all the stuff, and then you digitize it, you make a little short film or a thing with music and everything. But so when she sees, like there'll be a family, one of the families she's working on is a big family from Maine, very unlike her family, a big family, always skiing, sailing, doing all this stuff. There's, whenever she sees like, oh, there's going to be skiing, but they're drinking beer, she doesn't like that. It's dangerous, so she'll change the beer to soda. Or she'll see like a swimming, they're all in the swimming pool, and there's like a baby too close to the swimming pool, gonna drown. So she'll just like Photoshop in like a little gate. And And part of it is that she grew up in a family where like they had to be super careful because Eleanor had to, there had to be like rules and all this stuff. If you have any kind of physical disability, you have to be like, it's a whole different life. And so she was like, what are these people? Like, they have no consequences. They drink and ski and swim with the baby. I don't like this. And so she just every now and then very subtly will change. And she's kind of got away with it until, her boss finally sees her. It's not she doesn't get fired or anything, but it's kind of like.
But also, I mean, when, it does emphasize the randomness of life. I mean,
Yeah.
her family got, had a very severe, serious situation in their family, and it changed the trajectory of life. But these families that are like big and they're doing all this stuff and they're doing fine, it's like,
nothing's how, no, what's, it's unfair. And Joyce really has that sense of like, it's not fair.
Yeah,
It's not.
yeah. And so I have to ask, you mentioned this, did you really make there's some poetry that is based on some, small world / it's really next door post. Did you really take next door posts and kind of use
Yes. Yes and no. So I wish I could take credit for the genius idea, but of course I copied it and I credited it in the acknowledgements. But I have an old friend who's a professor of American Studies in University of Maryland. And every now and then on Facebook, he will post, he still does it. He will post, it's listserv down there. They have Nextdoor, but it's like a local listserv. And he would post lines, he would just take a post, slice it into poetry and post it. And I was like, oh my God, my head would explode. I was like, this is genius. You have to publish these. What are you going to do with them? And he's like, I don't have time. I have a job. I was like, well, I don't. What can I do with these? So I ended up using that idea. And the first draft of my novel, like I said, it spent many hours on Nextdoor looking. I had all these different categories, bad neighbors, turkeys, wild turkeys that are all over the place, all this weird stuff that you find on that site. And I turned my first draft into my editor, and she was like, she really liked the novel and everything. She said, oh my God, I love the poems. And I was like, me too. And I said, the thing is, they're verbatim from Nextdoor. Aren't they amazing? And she was like, you can't do that. Like, you can't just and I thought we could have a disclaimer at the beginning of the book, but these actually come. What I loved about the poems that when I had them in the first draft was that same as my friend Jason, they were actually absolutely, they just were from the site.
Right.
And you chop it and it's poetry.
So she said you can't, even though they couldn't be
Legally.
you can't necessarily trace them, but
she's like, you can't just copy. Okay, so I was so bummed, so I had to rewrite them. And I used like a line or two. I always used like a line or two from each of the posts, because each of the posts, some of them are really funny and some of them are really sad. A lot of lonely people and stuff like that. There was a real mixture. So I definitely used like one or two lines from each one, and then I rewrote the rest. And just yesterday, well, literally, I get an email from this woman named Kathy Flan, and she goes, hi. She goes, someone just told me that you wrote a novel with Nextdoor Poetry. She said, I've been writing Nextdoor Poetry for years, and it's been published like in McSweeney's and
oh my God.
places. And she's like, maybe we can, and just like, yeah, let's, whatever. Like, it was so funny. Like, she's been doing it. I'd never heard of her. And then my friend in DC, the Washington Post, had done this big article in February about, the Buy Nothing movement, where you post stuff and people just take it off your hands. And it's always awful stuff like, half a cabbage or like a shoe. And they refer to him as the poet laureate of listserv poetry.
Oh my God.
Like, see, it's now it's a trend, now we have a trend.
Now we're all going to do it.
We're all going to start doing it. But like,
the Nextdoor app.
Yeah.
So I do see that Marcelina is a friend of mine. I see her, that she came in, and Marcelina, you weren't here when we had a poll about whether you could live, if you had to, or at this age, if you could live with a sister. And I know you have quite a few sisters. Where are you, Marcelina? Please tell me what you could you live with one of your sisters? or did she go away? Oh, that was funny.
You popped on and left.
Maybe she left. I saw her come on. Anyway, so there goes my question. I thought it'd be funny to hear somebody talk about their sister. So do you have, I mean, do you recommend this book for people who have difficult relationships with their sisters, or, I mean, any, you know, because I did write about it today in my newsletter, I write about the sister aspect, but there's much more to it, of course, but I mean, just
Yeah,
maybe.
I mean, it has, it depends who's reading it. Some people focus really on the disability aspect. That is a piece of it. You know, that sort of serious part of it. There's, you know, there's the whole other comic side of living with your adult sibling, you know, in later in life, and dealing with people who open a yoga studio above your head. Like, that actually happened. We were having our lives downstairs, and then these new people moved in, and they took like a month to move in, which made no sense. And, you know, they kept coming over with stuff and nailing, and we were like, what's the, you know, like, what's the pre-move? Like, what's happening? And then they moved in, and there was all this weird noise, and we didn't understand it. And we literally would sit and we would just go like this, like, what is it? What is it? What is it? Why are all these people, are they having a party? Like, we couldn't figure it out. And then we found out, you know, they invited us upstairs for tea. I hate tea. And we went upstairs, and it was just like in the book, where you, when you live in a, like, especially like a house or whatever, and you go up the apartment upstairs, and it's like, ooh, you know, this is the same, or, oh, this is different. We have a closet, you have a bath, okay, whatever. And we literally went into that kitchen and turned the corner, and my husband and I were like, what the actual fuck? It was a complete studio. It was a yoga studio, and it had everything. You could have been like blindfolded me, and I would have thought I was in Cambridge, in a, you know, in town at a yoga studio. And they were just blithely
Just like,
running a business above our heads. Like, we were like, wait, what do you mean? Like, what is this? And they didn't seem to understand, like, it was illegal.
yeah.
And the landlords were friends and everything. And so it was this really awkward situation where, like, it was like our skin was on fire for 2 years. And we were just, everyone we could think of, we would just constantly talk about the people, you know, because it was all, you know, it was pre-COVID, but I worked at home and my husband was home, and we were home, you know, and there was this noise, and it was just crazy.
Yeah, that's the thing. And it was interesting, I guess. You know, when I think about it, the structure is you had to have a catalyst of some sort, you know. I mean, they were the catalyst for kind of moving the
things along,
story and making them, you know, kind of, you could see their differences. It brought out the real differences.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you write a novel, it has to have a plot.
Yeah.
If you could just write and not ever have to have a plot, I would be so much happier. It's really it's a drag. You have to actually, stuff has to happen, and it's really hard to figure it out. But yeah.
We have Jane. You raised your hand. You want to unmute and.
Yes, well, I don't have a question, but, you know, I'm a longtime Zigman fan. I've read all your books, Laura, and
I
I've
know
read.
your name, Jane.
Good
Nice
evening.
to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
And yes, I read your books for your voice, and it's just an incredibly special, dear voice to me, and the humor, yeah, and the sharp observation. And I do have to believe you're the first one who's probably spoofed Next Door. I've never seen I mean, in a book.
In a book, I think, yeah.
And I totally agree with you on plot. I don't care about the plot, although your plots always are satisfying. And absolutely love this book, and telling everyone to read it.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank
Yeah.
you. It's really it's so funny. Like, we're on social media for years and years and years, and I know your name. I've seen it.
Right.
You know.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hope to see you at the book fair, because I live in Los Angeles.
Oh, great.
And I'm planning on coming, and I would love to
Yay.
get an
Oh,
autograph
yes.
on the book.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So yeah, Laura, where are you doing still doing promotion and
Yeah, I'm doing a little bit here and there. I'm going to Connecticut this weekend to do a bookstore event with this great writer who I'm sure most of you know, know Alyssa Altman.
Ooh, yeah, yeah.
She's great. And so it's also funny because like probably many of us, she and I only know each other online. So, you know, we have these threads where we're just DMing. It's our first time we actually get to meet in person, have a conversation in a
Oh,
bookstore.
cool.
And then I'm going to the LA Times book festival.
Okay, where is, when is that, the LA Times?
That is April 22nd and 23rd. So I'm Saturday
Okay,
at 12 noon. I think it's at USC.
and
So
where in Connecticut in this weekend?
Hickory Stick Bookshop in Washington Depot. It's a
Oh.
great store. It's a great
And which
store.
day
It's
is
like,
it?
like sort of northwest Connecticut.
And what day is it? Saturday or Sunday?
Saturday at 4 p.m.
Oh, shoot, because I probably would be driving near there,
Oh, yeah.
but not
Yeah.
Saturday. Mm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
did a few events at the very beginning in January. It was nice.
And so what, I have to ask this, what can we look forward to next from you? What, are you-
Yeah, you know, I'm trying, after being blocked for a decade, I'm trying to just keep it going now. So I have started a new novel, and it's about a woman who gets divorced and her son goes off to college, and she moves to Gloucester, which is on the North Shore of Massachusetts. And it's a lot of people read The Perfect Storm, which was set in
Yeah.
Gloucester. And it's kind of a rough, it's my favorite place. Beaches are beautiful, and it's just
Yeah, I
a
love it.
wonderful place, but it's kind of a, you know, Massachusetts is not the most warm and fuzzy place. And so anyway, Judy decides to move to Gloucester for 6 months, you know, rent an apartment and kind of figure out her life, you know, at post-divorce. And she becomes a driver's ed teacher. And then she happens upon a store called Gloom Chaser. And Gloom Chaser is the title. And Gloom Chaser is both a drink, comes in one of these, you know, martini glasses, but last year I got really obsessed with the Kardashians briefly. I had never watched the Kardashians, never wanted, and they, for some reason, I watched 2 seasons and I got really involved, and then I stopped. But I get obsessed with things, and then I downloaded the sample of Kris Jenner's memoir, which I'm sure was ghostwritten. And I downloaded it for free, and I read it. And in the very beginning of the introduction of her memoir, she grew up in San Diego, I think in La Jolla. And she said her grandparents owned a candle store, and they owned this religious candles, and all these different kind of candles. She said, but the Gloom Chasers were the most popular. They were so popular that you couldn't keep them in stock. And I saw the word, and I was like, I love this word.
Oh,
I'm
God,
gonna write a book.
yes.
Use it
Oh.
for- So what is a Gloom Chaser? A Gloom Chaser is a votive candle, like stained glass, probably super cheap, but like stained glass. And you put the candle in it, and you light the candle, and it chases the gloom away, the Gloom Chaser. So anyway, it can also be like a storm chaser, like
Yeah.
Judy is looking for the gloom, you know, she's
Yeah, yeah.
chasing it. But you know, it's set in Gloucester, which is very gloomy in January, and it's, you know, one of those stories that I have no idea what it's going to be about. It's one of those things where like a bunch of stuff goes in the blender, and
Yeah.
then zzz.
Oh, good. Well, it's so fascinating to hear, you know, everybody's interested in a writer's process, but
Yeah, I have no process.
it's just, it's going in there and you're gonna like, what comes out? Let's see what comes out. So, well, we can't wait to see. We're gonna have you back then.
Thank you. Thank you.
And,
It's the only reason I write the books is to come on Next Tribe.
Oh gosh, yeah. But I really do appreciate your time, and we're so thrilled with your success, and just keep it coming, and keep focusing on the women our age, because we really do relate, and we love that you get us. You know, I think
Thank you, Jean.
and you have humor, which is so important.
Thank
So everyone, if you want to unmute and give Laura a big cheers, let's do that, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Hey.
Continued luck, and continued good reviews.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for having
Really
me.
fun. Thanks for being
Okay.
here.
Nice to
Thank
see
you.
all of you.
Bye-bye.
West Coast.
Okay,
Let's
yeah.
go.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.